We have given you recently, I think about 6 months ago, an update on CoCare and kind of how it has shifted from the first vision of CoCare. When we first came to you, gosh, it must have been a couple years ago. So we've done a further analysis of the program, and I'll start this by saying, when we know better, we do better. And so that is really our proposal, is for us to do better. That includes a pivoting on the program to align services, to train more police officers, and to create some organizational efficiencies. And so I'm going to hand it over to the chiefs to talk about what their proposal is.
Mayor and Council, good afternoon. So yeah, what she said is going to lead me right into what we're talking about. So I want to walk you through kind of what our presentation is going to be today. We're going to look a little bit about our history. We're going to talk about the positions, what our mission has been. We want to talk to you about some data and some challenges that we've had measuring that data over time. And then kind of an area comparison as we drive into what is ahead for us in CoCare. So just a history for you, and you've been here longer than me, so you're actually familiar with all of these history milestones that we've achieved. First, coming out of a Listen, Learn, Lead session in 2020, number 13's recommendation as part of the annual budget process, review emerging trends, explore options for alternative response, certain types of police calls through civilian personnel trained in mental health specializations, specially trained police personnel, or partnerships with community service agencies. That's what became the genesis for us moving forward with this community caretaking unit, which was presented to Council in a retreat almost 3 years ago. And that presentation talked about a field response with follow-up service as kind of a la carte position on CoCare. But the primary focus was to be out in the field with these calls for service when people were in mental health crisis. And so the daily staffing was pitched for a 12-hour shift from 10A to 10P. The council actually was so motivated back then, and they directed an immediate implementation of CoCare, not waiting for that budget cycle to occur at the end of October or the beginning of October, but to start it right away. And so we began that in June of 2021, and the staffing included, at the time, 2 Lewisville police officers, 1 firefighter paramedic who was also certified as a peace officer. There were some additional firefighter paramedics added later. And at the bottom, I want to point out to you, it's important that we have these firefighter paramedics cross-trained as peace officers. And the reason is because the state law allows only a peace officer to issue what is called an emergency detention order. Someone who may need immediate medical care because of their mental status, they can only be taken in on an EDO by a sworn peace officer. So that's why you see firefighters that are cross-trained as peace officers in this staffing makeup. And then lastly was an MHMR clinician. This was approved by Council on February 7th of 2022, and that involved a partnership between us and MHMR. We had the Serve Lewisville. This was approved by Council on July 18th, 2022. The construction of it, or the modification of it, occurred between 2022 and 2023, with us actually moving in late November 2023. The occupants, actually as of today, is MHMR of Tarrant County. I'm sorry, that's definitely a typo. No, it actually is. It is Tarrant County. I thought it was a typo when they sent it to me. I was like, we're in Denton County, and they told me it's Tarrant County. Blue Door Market Pantry, Boys and Girls Club, and then Single Parent Advocates, Boys and Girls Club proper itself, as well as our CoCare office out of Serve Lewisville. And so right now we are authorized with this staffing makeup. In the police department, we have 2 police officers full-time that are authorized for CoCare. Right now we're carrying 1 vacancy, and I'm going to talk to you about that here in just a minute. The fire department is authorized 2 firefighter, paramedic, arson investigators, and Chief McNeil is carrying 1 vacancy in his shop as well. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about his positions.
Yeah, so initially with our positions, we funded 3 places. So that gave us 1 CoCare firefighter on each shift. These were dual function positions for us. So they were firefighter paramedics as well as peace officers. The peace officer, as Chief Rollins explained, was not only important for the CoCare side, but is also important for our side, because to be an arson investigator, you have to be a peace officer. So that played a dual role for us and allowed these guys to serve both CoCare and investigations for us. So they did investigations, both fire and background, for us. And then as part of this program, a vehicle was funded for the fire department for that CoCare position.
Okay. So what was the mission of CoCare when we got started? The original concept was a field response team that would address calls for service, that'll be abbreviated that way in the rest of the presentation, involving mental health, crises, and we had 4 goals that were planned that were pitched to you at that time. Reducing call load, calls for service to LPD and LFD, connecting consumers with necessary mental health care, building relationships with our mental health community, and focusing on a field response to increase CoCare on-scene care. That was the idea. Now, back in October of 2023, we came back to you after we had been into this business for just a little bit and talked to you about some of the modifications that we had already learned about. One being the relationship building and partnerships was very important. We learned the importance of having people we could connect these citizens to instead of just simply taking them to a hospital. We have proactive care, preventing future 911, and learning that was key. We deal with a lot of people on a repeat basis, and so the idea of trying to divert them from future use of 911 was important. CoCare cannot be at every mental health call. That is an unrealistic expectation. And then documentation issues were kind of noted, as well as our MHMR clinician resigned. That was a temporary relationship that we had. But the conclusion of all of these findings at that time was follow-up care became more valuable than originally theorized, and field response appeared to be unsustainable in the long run. So, with some documentation and challenges with data, this is what we're seeing as we are standing here today. There's productivity measurements that I don't know that they were clearly established up front, and this is kind of what Claire was talking about with doing better in the future and understanding what exactly it is we're trying to measure. But there's really no metric to track success. I have a feeling if I polled all of you and said, how do we know if CoCare is successful? We might come up with some different answers. Fewer 911 calls, fewer people being taken to the hospital, fewer people calling us more than once. So there's a lot of things we could look at to determine whether or not we're experiencing success in this field. We have some data collection challenges as well. Our current CAD system does not have an active tracking component for mental health calls. It will in a couple of weeks as a result of what we found here, but up until this point we don't really have that, which has led to manual data counting on a weekly or monthly basis, which, as you can imagine, is probably not the most effective way to leverage the software and systems we have to make good counts. Our CAD RMS implementation, while it's not been a bad thing, it has been involved with data conversion from the old to the new system. So in some of these points here, you're going to see we are in some data gaps as we're continuing to convert data into our new system. So until full migration, our analytics are not fully automated just yet. There's also a lack of tracking of repeat calls for service locations or consumers. Being able to determine that we keep running into Brooke Rollins in the street would be a good thing for the officers and the firefighters to know, and we want to have a way that that can be tracked. We're going to talk about that. Looking overall at our calls for service, over the last 3 years, we are seeing a trend and a downward trend of mental health calls for service in Lewisville. Now, in comparison to other cities, as I've had conversations with local chiefs, this is an ongoing trend. We are seeing this elsewhere. There is a reduction in mental health calls for service. We could probably hold an entire day's work on why we think that might be, but in either case, we're happy that that is occurring. So from 2022 at 1,291 total calls for service involving police and fire resources that had mental health components, down to 997 in 2023. And in 2024, you're looking at a number that is an estimated end of year. Why is that? Because when we talked about that data conversion in CAD, that counting system is not fully automated. So we took everything that occurred all the way through the data implementation of CAD and then estimated to the end of the year based on month-over-month usage of mental health calls. So that's generally where we would expect it to end at the end of the year if the consumption remained consistent all the way through. You'll see that same calculation throughout this presentation. So year over year, we're on a downward trend, but an overall decrease of 41% for our mental health calls for service. So let's talk about performance metrics of CoCare. On the left side of each of these graphs or figures, you're looking at total field response. On the right side, you're looking at CoCare response. Field response, 412. This is for they're out in the field. The number of times they've gone out, down to 363, down to 143. That's quite a pitch down of what CoCare has done year over year, and the field response has become more challenging or at least reduced. Again, that's an estimated end of year. Follow-up care. This is where you're seeing the steady business actually continuing. This is where we're seeing relationships being more valuable and we're getting more bang for our buck with interacting with folks that are in mental health crisis for follow-up. So 320, 330, and I know it says 253 here, but when Chief McNeil and I talked about this with the vacancies we're each experiencing, we simply believe that those vacancies are why it's slightly reduced from its average of every year before that. So we don't see much of a pitch down in follow-up care because we're getting so much usage out of it. So let's look at mental health treatment. Whenever somebody, a police officer, or one of our CoCare firefighters transports somebody or detains somebody on an emergency detention order, we're capturing that data. The top graph here, or the blue bar, represents the total number of emergency detention orders year over year, 237, 229, 217 with the estimated end of year. Then when you look at CoCare, you see 34, 28, and 35. This is an important metric of why field field response is so difficult. If we believe we could take these 4 or 5 employees and they could hit all 237 or 217 of those mental health emergency detention orders, we're way overestimating what we think they can do. Most of our field staff from the police and the fire department are able to take care of those issues themselves, and we find that using CoCare employees to do it for that transport is not as effective. So this is an important stat to look at for why we feel some change is necessary. So let's look at cases assigned. This is kind of the back end of what is beneficial to the rest of the police department is case reports. We are armed report takers. We do everything in writing and document everything that we did. Total number of CoCare reports that we conducted are in the orange. The blue represents everything else that goes to criminal investigations. So we've diverted that many reports from my criminal investigations unit by having the CoCare unit, which is taking some of the work off of them and putting it in the place where it needs to be. So this is a beneficial thing to keep. Just make sure we focus it in the right area. We also, what's important to notice is a good community narrative. Not every person that's experiencing mental health crisis is committing a crime. These are the number of crimes that were committed by those in mental health crisis. You can count them on 2 hands in some cases, right? So this is the ongoing narrative of folks that are experiencing crisis, and while they're not committing crimes, they are using your police and in some cases your firefighters and paramedics for their services in the field. So what did we do? We looked around at what is everybody else doing. That's usually a good place to check. Denton County is currently operating with 6 deputies and 4 clinicians. They're using a co-responder model where they work together and go into the field. The deputies will handle the calls in progress. The clinicians handle the follow-up. Their comments is it presented with some limited success. Most people refuse follow-up care. Denton Police Department, 8 officers, 7 clinicians, and 1 paramedic. Very well staffed. Their officers and clinicians pair up for field response, but they also report limited success due to resource constraints. They also are trying to keep their front end staffed, and they're having a hard time keeping the back end staffed. Flower Mound PD, this was the one that we think we liked the most. They have 1 officer, 1 mental health coordinator, and 6 collateral duty officers. This is something that we're going to capitalize on here in our strategy. What this is officers that are assigned normally to their regular job 8 to 5, but they also do mental health care work on the side, and we can pull them out of service and help the mental health side of things when they're not working patrol or when they're able to do it and when they're in patrol. It's easier to grab them and still keep them assigned to their patrol assignments. So this is where we've kind of learned this is an opportunity for us. They focus on relationship building with consumers, trying to divert future calls for service away from 911, and they called their approach, which I liked, a concierge-style approach with frequent check-ins and proactive stance. Their calls for service has steadily decreased. Now, we saw that when we looked at our own stats, that we're seeing a reduction in calls for service, but they're experiencing the same. The common thread is we're focusing resources on proactive follow-up ensures longer-term success rather than reactive crisis intervention. So what is our strategy going to look like in the police department as we move forward? We're going to do a focused, mission-driven team. I have CoCare and I have NROs. And these are 2 different units, but I'm going to bring them into one place and have them focus on 3 main goals. Right now, our NROs work a lot on parking and neighborhood complaints. This is something that I believe I can take and shift out into my geographic accountability that is being rolled out in the police department and away from NROs. Not that they're incapable of doing it, but this is something that problem solving is driven all the way down to the first responding officer, not just a specialized group of officers that handle certain problems at houses. So my NROs will reshift their efforts, combine with CoCare, and focus on crime prevention, mental health follow-ups, and homelessness outreach all at one time. Well, probably not all at one time, but as their overall work goal. So as my crime officer or my officers in the field, hey, man, I've got a vehicle burglary issue going on in this block or at this apartment complex. The sergeant, the beat officer, they can make contact with the owners of those locations and start figuring out what kind of outreach they need to do to reduce crime. They can lean back on the NROs to assist them with that, with their outreach or their public communication. Or if they run into folks that are experiencing homelessness or those that are in mental health crisis, they can roll back to that NRO. Those NROs will be assigned 1 per police district, and then my CoCare, the 6th officer, is going to be kind of a centralized, dedicated officer that just handles the original intake and follow-up of each one of our mental health calls for service. This is not a budget ask. This is using the involved people that we already have, filling our vacancies and collapsing everybody into one spot. So we'll then take that proactive approach to reduce 911 calls for service. Then we want to enhance some of our partnerships and training to include a more collaborative approach with Denton County MHMR or any other nonprofit organizations that specialize in these services. And then we want to train 8 to 10 mental health peace officers per shift. This is important because in the last 2 years, one of our CoCare employees is trained as a mental health peace officer. In order to train other mental health peace officers, you have to have been in practice for 2 years doing this job. She's now over that line, and we're able to bring in more mental health peace officers. That'll allow us to train quarterly between CoCare, NROs, and our mental health peace officers, and that basically allows us to expand our number of personnel without having to go and ask for it in a budget request. So I've got people assigned at CoCare, I've got my NROs doing similar work, all assigned by district, and then I've got 8 to 10 cops that are out in patrol assigned on each shift that can assist and train with CoCare and our NROs on a routine basis, so they're caught up and familiar with our follow-up care access. This gives us better access to CoCare resources from our patrol and NRO side. They get direct access to one another, so I think that brings us a stronger and a more compassionate intervention. I'm going to hand it back over to Chief McNeil.
All right, and for the fire department, as we have shifted from a initial response unit, the need for that paramedic is really not there. So as we shift out of the CoCare program, we're going to be looking at the need to put that Engine 6 in service at Station 6, and then our initiative to move toward 4-person staffing in the future. So we had presented that need and started working and planning for that last year. We applied for the SAFER grant to help with the funding for that, and the city set aside some partial funding in our current year's budget to implement this initiative. However, unfortunately, we did not receive the SAFER grant. So as part of the 25-26 budget proposal, you'll see staffing for that need for Station 6, and then we're going to put that 4th firefighter on Engine 8. However, as we move these CoCare positions back to shift and we put them back into fire and EMS response, that ask will be reduced from the initial 15 people that we had down to 12, so that CoCare will offset 3 of those positions. We'll continue to pursue the SAFER grant in the future, and we still retain that benefit of the arson investigators on shift because they'll still be able to do some of those investigations while they're on shift. The vehicle that was funded as part of the CoCare for us was outfitted as a police vehicle, so it makes sense. They've got a need for it. We will reallocate that vehicle to the police department.
So next steps. First thing is we're going to standardize our protocols and procedures. I talked to you about data collection issues. This is an opportunity for us to remedy that. So we'll develop our clear procedures, clear follow-up guidelines, and our outreach. We'll align our response protocols with best practices and the community needs. We'll look at measurable goals. How do we know if we're successful? Some of the implementations include simplicity of just having an officer check a box on their computer dispatch system when they close the call. That is an improvement that working with our RMS implementation team and our IT that will allow us on an automated basis to be able to dump a mental health report every week, that we can start funneling some of these follow-ups automatically. We don't have to go manually search it. Staffing and team alignment, allowing our personnel to get finalized and into their new team structure, and that'll help us ensure a smooth transition into their refocused roles. And then we'll start looking at a Serve Lewisville exploration for what the future of that looks like with our presence out at the new Tittle McFadden Public Safety Center.
I just wanted to pause on there for Serve Lewisville and specifically. So putting CoCare there obviously was important for city to have a presence in that facility. I do think that aligning this team with the NROs really needs to be in one location. So then we have a space that would be there in the future. Now, obviously, we're not pulling out today, but when the Tittle McFadden opens up, that would be the idea. I will say that the synergy we were hoping to get was that CoCare would be right next to Tarrant County MHMR. Tarrant County MHMR has not been staffing that location. So there's not been that synergy we were really hoping for. But I do think there's opportunities. I mean, we're currently talking to several nonprofits that could potentially provide kind of the surround support for mental health in our community that could be a service to our police department as well. And if that's the case, this could be an opportunity to place them in there. I think the cost is still, the one we're talking to, the cost there is still higher than where they're being offered. Even though it is 50% of the market rate, they're getting a sweet deal somewhere else in Lewisville to come here. But we're still exploring that, and we'll bring that to you once we have some options. I do believe that that is the intention of council, that they would like to have a presence and serve Lewisville. I would like to pause on that and make sure I'm reading you guys right. Yes?
Agreed.
Okay.
I just have a question. I am confused. Why on earth do we have MHMR of Tarrant County and not Denton County?
So that's the, Denton County's presence is not as big as Tarrant County's, and Tarrant County's outreach, for whatever reason, is able to be brought over to here. Some of their services are applicable here. I'm not sure exactly what the history of how they ended up here is. I just know that's their current presence, and Elena is frantically waving at me.
Yeah, I was going to say, this needs to be Ashley Farian. Come on up here. Answer.
There's 2 MHMRs that are located there.
You need to be on the...
MHMR does their family child care system program there, and then Denton County MHMR was going to be providing mental health services, but has understaffed that space. Just so they're 2 different MHMRs, 2 different programs.
Okay, so Denton County was actually the one that was supposed to be with the CoCare.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right.
All right, moving ahead. So how do we achieve success? Well, based on the way we started last time, what we're trying to do this time, the focus here is intentional steps to success. So we're going to maintain a status quo for a little bit. We've talked about a lot of strategic changes. These changes are not happening tomorrow. Fire department's not going anywhere tomorrow. Police officers aren't going anywhere tomorrow. But over the next several months, at least beyond October-ish, we look at trying to make sure we take all the right steps to get us into the right position to make these changes. We want to have a clear stability before we go, strategic rollout of changes, make sure we're aligning all these processes with real-time feedback and our operational needs, gradual coordinated implementation, regularly assess our progress, making these data-driven improvements. We've been working collaboratively with IT. We want to make sure we're getting the right information in as we're making decisions. And then the key part here is adjusting those strategies based on that feedback that we get from internal and external resources. So you'll see us maintain this status quo until all these items are complete, but we will eventually arrive where we have this new combined group of people. They may have a new name just to try to help everything look different and forget what the previous was and accidentally refer to something that it wasn't, but we'll get there when it gets to that point. So we're focusing on that strong framework, ensuring personnel policies and partnerships are fully aligned. And so with that, I appreciate you having no questions.
Please, I appreciate you having no questions.
Council? Question. Just a comment about CoCare and how it's functioning. Now, I think we had this conversation, but last year on the Saturday afterwards, I had a resident who was going through a mental health crisis that I knew, and the police officer came out and handled it terrifically. The missing link is not something that the city can fix. The missing link is the mental health care professionals, which we already know through United Way of Denton County are very short, and Denton County MHMR is overloaded, and they do the best they can with folks, and they kind of release them back. So I'm very happy to hear that we're going to have a tracking function for those folks to keep them from having additional issues. I understand, there's no need to change the name, but we understand that the function has to change for it to be effective. So,
yes, sir. Thank you.
I don't have a question, just have a comment. This is one of the first things that I was a part of when I first came on council. And I'm also a part of Serve Lewisville. But I do appreciate the fact that you've kind of reanalyzed this and just not, keep going, and we're not getting the result that we really want to have. So I think this is a great analyzation of what's actually going on, and the care afterwards is actually more important than just being at the initial event. So great job on that. So
thank you.
Other comments? I'm appreciative of the diversion that we've been able to see for staffing, so I think that's important to be able to capture that and continue that, which is obviously what you're looking at, is how to get those best practices. I think the other thing that we can do with that data is, of course, send it on to our state reps. Next time they go through budget appropriations, and we can take a look at, hey, this is the impact on my PD. So appreciate it. Thank you.